Welcome. I'm Samantha Oakley with ALA's Public Programs Office. I'm pleased to introduce today's webinar, Media Literacy for Adults, Media Engagement and Creation. Next slide, please. Before we start, I'd like to make a couple of quick notes about our virtual classroom. Only our presenters have microphone access, but you are welcome to type your questions in the Q&A box. To send a question, move your cursor towards the bottom of the Zoom window and click Q&A. Please also use the Q&A window to communicate any technical issues with ALA staff. Please don't use the chat for technical questions as they could be easily missed if that window is very busy. We will respond to your technical questions as quickly as possible. Note that this session will be recorded, so if you would like to review any information, you may do so via the archived version that we send out within 48 hours of this session. Next slide, please. Today's webinar is presented by ALA's Public Programs Office as part of the Media Literacy Education in Libraries for Adult Audiences project, which is made possible in part by a grant from the Institute of Museum and Library Services. The views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this webinar do not necessarily represent those of the Institute of Museum and Library Services or of ALA. Next slide, please. As information providers and hubs for lifelong learning, libraries have always been resources for helping communities develop media literacy skills. Now, in the midst of a global pandemic and in an age when we increasingly rely on digital media for information and communication, these critical thinking skills are more important than ever. The Media Literacy Education in Libraries for Adult Audiences project is designed to support libraries in their efforts to improve the media literacy skills of adults in their communities. By tapping the expertise of a diverse group of 30 thought leaders, this project has created a suite of free media literacy resources, including a practitioner's guide and a series of 6 webinars. In this final webinar in the series, Kurtis Kelly will be discussing how the library works as a media creator and how patrons can discover their voices through media creation. Next slide, please. With that, I'm pleased to introduce Kurtis today. Kurtis is the communications specialist for Estes Valley Library, where he has enjoyed a 30-year career that has included planning programs and resources for a busy mid-sized rural library. From 2015 to 2017, he was the project lead for Common Sense for Colorado, a statewide financial literacy consortium created through ALA's Smart Investing at Your Library program. That initiative earned Colorado's Library Project of the Year award. In 2017, he became part of the original team of librarians launching ALA's Media Literacy at Your Library project. In addition to being an enthusiastic promoter of libraries, he works as a costume storyteller portraying historic characters. And with that, I'm pleased to turn things over to Kurtis.
Thank you, Samantha, and a huge thank you to the team at ALA for all their work in bringing media literacy to the forefront, including their leadership to bring together the recent practitioner's guide that Samantha mentioned, and of course, these webinars. As Samantha mentioned, we at Estes Valley Library were honored to be part of that initial cohort of libraries back in 2017, and it led us to some special media literacy programs in our community and to some really amazing networking with other libraries. On that note, today's topic of media engagement and media creation has led me on a learning journey. One of the things that's guided the content in this session today is some outreach I did with some other colleagues whose libraries were connected in some way with the first or second ALA cohort group. I've pulled together some great ideas that I'm eager to share, but I know I've only scratched the surface. It's like in this photo, ascending a ridge where you realize there is so much more beyond the horizon. So during the session and during our Q&A, I invite all of you who may have an innovation or a special program to share to go ahead and note that in the chat room, and we can use that transcript to kind of pull together all of the ideas that I didn't get a chance to find out in my learning journey thus far and that we can share with others. Also, I want to mention, of course, the resource page that's available, and that'll include links to all the sites that I mentioned along the way. So don't feel you have to jot down the website links along the way. You'll have that resource page to refer to. The ideas that I refer to here today are representative, but they are not exhaustive. So let's get started. This slide is a table of contents of what we'll cover today. In our program description, we invited the opportunity today to explore both how libraries create media content and how we connect with our patrons who are media content creators. And I hope we can explore both and really see them as one whole, their insights and takeaways from both. Along the journey, we'll review some key ideas. And of course, you can get the fullest perspective using the Great Practitioner's Guide and by watching the other webinars. There will now be 6 webinars, all online, and you can actually binge watch media literacy for libraries. We'll look at some examples of spaces, and especially spaces that were designed for media creation. We'll talk about some of the programs that libraries are offering to connect with their media creating patrons. We'll talk about that powerful component of identifying potential local partners and collaborators. And in this time when so much of our local journalism coverage has been disrupted, we'll talk about this interesting idea of how some libraries are filling that void with connective journalism of their own. Some definitions, first off. Of course, media engagement is something that most of us do on a daily basis. It's as general as engaging in some way with social media, likes, shares, retweets, comments. And it's so easy to do today. And it's comparable in the past to everything from, say, writing a letter to the editor, calling into a radio talk show, or even clipping a newspaper article to mail to your grandma in another state. Maybe clipping a newspaper article that you post on the bulletin board at work. Those are ways that we engage with media and share it with others, and in the process sort of highlight what we think is important. Now, media creation is more unique, but it can be as simple as posting a photo to a social media page. It can be as complex as creating a polished video that goes through a whole editing and design process. And that includes music, which is a form of personal expression and storytelling. And I've heard from many that many of your patrons are using your media creation labs for music. We'll talk about that. I think it makes sense to see media engagement and media creation in the same context. And if we were to ask, why is it worthwhile to connect with media creators? Well, here are some reasons we can consider. You might imagine someone who sets up a media studio in their home and never has to come in the library. And then contrast that with your patrons who do use the library for the equipment and training. With those library users come these opportunities. You can connect them to the fuller range of library services, whether it's the collections to research their project or programs to keep them inspired. You have opportunities to connect them with thinking about the civics and ethics of what they create and post, maybe at programs, maybe in conversations, maybe in signage and displays. Your library patrons are more likely to see what they do as a larger part of a larger village, really, and maybe work in collaboration through programs that you offer. And by the way, for the purposes of this webinar, our title is Media Literacy for Adults, but I'm also including young adults and teens in that context. For those of you who, some of you in your day-to-day jobs serve both those populations. From the Practitioner's Guide, we posited 3 general reasons why people create media content, all valid ones. And I'll invite you in the chat room to reiterate if you see some of your patrons using your spaces for these reasons, or maybe there's other motivators we haven't thought of. In the guide, we said, well, for some, it's especially about self-expression and a sense of personal satisfaction. For others, the focus can really be on the pursuit of business and career goals. They may be small business owners, or they may be marketing what they do artistically and or professionally. 3, the pursuit of political and social change. So in the chat room, if you have some thoughts on, are there any that we missed? Are there other reasons that people are motivated by? Or do you see some of these activities in your library? Feel free to share that in the chat room. And if we don't get to look at that list right now, we can talk about that when we get to our Q&A section. Why is it important to think about this? Well, it may guide how you design your spaces and your programs. If you're really working to expand outreach to your business community, for instance, well, you might be focused on workshops that help people with that. One of the exercises that you can benefit from, if you haven't already, is to create what we might call a media vision for your library. I put together a worksheet that's available, and some of you may have that now, or it's available. The link is available. And it invites you to ask questions like these. For instance, what are your library's goals and aspirations? Some of those might be things like, you might think, for when you connect with patrons, you can, in this way with media creation, it's another way to serve the community. It might expand the perception of what the library is and can be. It can build new partnerships and collaborations. It can help patrons with those things we just talked about. And some of you are sharing those in the chat room. Things we talked about like self-expression and marketing. Some people are using it for creativity and expression and fun. Some people recording their family history memoirs, all kinds of amazing things. Your goals might be to help patrons become more media literate. Your goal might be to find ways to create content, help them create content, I should say, in ethical and responsive ways. And you might also have a goal to fill some of the voids in local news gathering or story gathering. 2, you can take time to list your existing resources, spaces, equipment, and programs. What do you have already? And what do you want to build upon? You can assess your local media landscape. Who and what are your local media? And think about partners you're working with, or you might benefit from working with in the future. You'll want to think about agreements and policies that you'll need to develop. We have a section in the practitioner's guide to help you with how to measure your outcomes. And then the fun begins, and you can embark on the next steps in your journey. And thanks to everyone who's some great ideas in the chat room of ways patrons are connecting with media content creation in your libraries. Spaces, let's tour some of the libraries and media spaces you might find in them. Remember, if you were to have nothing more than a Wi-Fi network, people are using it for media engagement and creation. If you have public computers, patrons are using those computers for media engagement and media creation. And more, we're finding ways to create special spaces with special equipment and opportunities for workshops and training and collaboration. This slide shows a peek into the window of the Makerspace room here at the Estes Valley Library. The Auburn, Maine Public Library was one of our fellow media literacy cohorts in 2017. They took things a step further and have a Create Media Lab. My thanks to Donna Wallace at Auburn for these photos. Auburn uses Macintosh-based equipment, and they started offering workshops in things like iPhoto, iMovie, GarageBand. And Donna said something interesting, that along the way, with a small lab, they found that it was really effective to shift from more of a scheduled workshop approach to doing one-on-one tutorials. She said the most popular uses of recent times have been 1, new adults and teens creating music, especially rap music, and 2, adults learning to digitize their documents and photos and films. And I think some of you mentioned that in the chat. Like most of the media labs out there, Auburn's has been closed for the past year due to the pandemic. And Donna said something that I think most of us probably are experiencing as well, that while those labs were closed to the public, library staff were especially grateful for these spaces to create all that virtual programming that so many of us have been doing over the past year. So it's another way to think about your labs. How can they also serve your library media creation needs? And by the way, Donna is a participant today. And if there are any questions for Donna, she'll be in the chat room and can help us with those. So. All right. Here's a picture of the digital media lab at Tacoma, Washington Public Library. And my thanks to John Hargis, the digital media lab instructor at Tacoma Public, who shared some great insights. Tacoma's labs occupy the space of 2 medium-sized offices. And in fact, they were formed from vacant spaces that were once occupied by staff. Here's another photo from Tacoma. And what do patrons do in the digital media lab? Well, they can record and produce music. They can edit graphics and digital photos. They can transfer media from one format to another. They can develop their YouTube presence. They can work to create their own podcasts and vlogs. And I'll talk a little bit more about their programs and workshops in just a bit. Here are some excerpts from Tacoma's Digital Media Lab values, and we have that full document available in the links. On the points, and I'll take a moment to read these quotes. It says, "We offer encouragement and support while being neutral about content. We show deference to artistic and technical decisions that might not be our own." It says, "Frustration is an important part of the artistic process. We hold that the intention, motivation, and perseverance of each user can overcome the challenges and obstacles they will I think that should be likely face along the way." And so, and on that second point, one of the things that John noted for me was not only that it's important to think about mentoring your patrons, but not to become the producer in their project, not to necessarily, not to be the driver or the creating force in their final product, to let them find their path and their voice. Also, something else that John noted, the lab does check out some expensive equipment to take home, and that's something you can think about too. Do you have equipment you check out? Would you want to have media creation equipment for your patrons to take home? At Tacoma, they have camcorders, digital cameras, tripods, and microphones. John asks everyone with a work-at-home project, every patron with a work-at-home project, to submit a brief written production plan. And that does 2 things. One, it helps assure someone is really serious before they take that expensive equipment home. And 2, I kind of think that it's like a business plan. It helps the patron focus and nurture their idea before they go into production. So something to think about. And John said in the years that they've asked for a production plan, they've only had pushback from 1 patron. So it seems to work effectively there. And I know we have some people from Dallas with us today. This is an exciting new space that just opened in 2019 on the 3rd floor of the Dallas Public Library Central location. This is the Story Center, and it's part of 2 other studios, the Heritage Lab, as well as a fiber arts workroom. This is the Story Center we see in this photograph with a podcasting studio, video editing bays, and writing equipment, and with access to the full Adobe Creative Cloud suite of programs. I realize in my credit there that Emily Jackson, this photo appeared in the Dallas Observer, and Emily is actually on staff at the Dallas Public Library. So the credit should go to Dallas Public Library for that photo. And my thanks also to Kristen Calvert, who runs the Story Center and is part of our ALA Media Literacy cohort. Some examples of how the lab's been utilized. Kristen said some recent examples before the COVID closure included an entire middle school class learning about media creation. They had a StoryCorps collaboration, and that led to some oral history recordings. And there was a local podcast that came and used the space to record actors who were performing The Color Purple at the Dallas Opera House. Thanks again to Kristen. And of course, you can reach out to Kristen and the team at Dallas Public Library if you have some questions about their spaces. Let's talk about programs and how we connect with media creators. And you might use some combination of these different approaches. You can see ways we connect include programs. It might include appointment times. It might include on-the-spot one-on-one assistance. It might include office hours. It might include, like we do at Estes Valley, a badging system where patrons go through a training workshop of some kind, and then they're badged so that we know they're comfortable using the equipment, and their experience is less likely to be frustrating for them because they've had the training. For media creators, it's often a chance to connect with the values and ethics around their creation, helping assure they're not doing something harmful to themselves or others, for instance. On that note, where and how we can remind digital creators, including ourselves, to always think about our digital footprint. There are some great resources out there to help us and our patrons. We have this video in the resource links. It's a short YouTube video, really actually a kind of nice video that you could show at a workshop, or if you just had a few minutes of someone's time to send them the link. And when we talk about digital footprint, gosh, it's really that trail of cookie crumbs that we leave behind whenever we engage with online media or post content or create content. If you can get folks gathered for a workshop, like I mentioned, there are some great resources out there. You could also think about if you have a connection with your local high school about doing a workshop for your student journalism class, or there might be a whole range of high school courses where they would welcome a library staff member coming in and doing a brief presentation about thinking about the digital footprint. And show you maybe on this next slide here. And this really, some of these ideas came from an article in the International Computer Science Institute at UC Berkeley. And they talked about, these are some questions we can ask ourselves and patrons. Before you post something, think about who can see and read this post. And it really involves working with our patrons and those critical thinking skills that sometimes in the zeal to post something, we don't take those couple minutes to think about these questions. People should ask, will my post offend people? And if it does, am I okay with the potential results of that? Is there hidden data, privacy issues? Am I posting something, am I posting some pictures of the grandkids and maybe mom and dad don't want those pictures out there, knowing that they will pretty much be out there for all times. Knowing something will be around forever, do I really want to share it? And are you sharing information about someone else? And if so, are they okay with that? So these are some of the questions we can help. Some of the ways we can do that. There are actually posters you can order. There is signage. You can help people think about privacy settings on their social media. If you have a workshop, I was thinking one of the things you could even do is put a little placard in your computer lab to say, want to know how to maximize your social media privacy settings? Ask us. And then if you have a platform for that, maybe you have a list of resources you can send them. Maybe you have a workshop. Maybe you're able to do office hours to help people with that. So those are simple ways where sometimes you can hook someone in who might not be thinking about their privacy settings, but they see a sign and say, oh, yeah, maybe I would like to learn how to maximize those privacy settings. Okay, and this is a picture of a book by author Stephanie Humphrey, and it's got the perfect title, Don't Let Your Digital Footprint Kick You in the Butt. And if all you can do is connect with someone and give them those 4 words, she says those 4 words are, think before you post. Let's talk about some of the creative programs that libraries are doing. This is a screenshot from the Skokie, Illinois Public Library's 3-part workshop series on making videos and podcasts. The series was really designed with a focus on basic digital production skills, with lots of great screen sharing of tech visuals and online resources. And in addition to that, the series incorporated the benefits of peer cohort learning. There are ways to do that at in-person programs as well as in online platforms that we've all gotten used to using more in the past year. This is a screenshot of their second session, the office hours session with a Q&A approach where people can bring their questions to the table. All 3 of the videos in this series are online, and we have those links in the resource list. At Tacoma Public Library, here's one of the workshops they offer on a regular basis. Be your own record label with a focus on both music and spoken word content creation. They also have what they call HAL workshops, HAL being the notorious computer in 2001: A Space Odyssey, but here HAL is an acronym for Have a Look at Coding. And it's another thing to think about. Coding workshops, especially for young people, seem to be popular because that definitely plays into the kind of media creation that they can do. So think about coding as one of your program ideas. Another note from Tacoma, they offer library card access to lynda.com, which is now called LinkedIn Learning. I think we have their video tutorial on that in the resources. And lynda.com, now LinkedIn Learning, offers thousands of online tech instruction videos that are great for patrons and for all of us library media content creators as well when you're needing a quick tutorial on something. Free YouTube videos have a lot, but LinkedIn Learning is another great place. Live It Loud is hosted by the Ted Brown Music Store and Tacoma Public Library, connected with this summer music workshop as a partnership. And it just is an example of the kind of experience that participants could have as a result of a partnership. Zine making. This is a screenshot of Skokie Public Library's workshops on zine making. There were 4 workshops in the series that included topics like colors and shapes and change and transformation. They had several staff members involved from different departments. And in this case, the zines were focused on physical zines, but also the concepts apply to lots of media creation. In other words, how to tell your personal story and how to share a unique perspective. For some participants, Skokie connected this to a related project, a call for stories in the time of COVID-19. It's a great example of how a library can invite community members to create content around a specific theme. And again, help everyone to see our connectedness. You'll see in this description, they mention a real spectrum of formats, short stories, zines, video or audio recordings, recipes, photos, textile arts, collages, and much more. One of the video creations that came out of this project from a media-focused teen volunteer group, I'm hoping to show you here too.
2020 is going to be my year. But nothing goes as planned, does it? In January, we said goodbye to Kobe and Gigi. The world was left in tears. What else did we have to fear? In February, we heard news of the Muslim internment camps in China, but the world turned away. Then, in March, the virus hit. 2 weeks off school. No, 3. We were in a crisis. While we were stuck in quarantine, polluted skies became clean. April 2020, another month in quarantine. We lost more to the virus as those infected increased. May. Congratulations to the class of 2020. Graduates celebrated from their homes. Quarantine was lifted. The virus was still transmitted. Yemen faced the largest humanitarian crisis to date, but we were too focused on the virus. June 2020. George Floyd was killed by Minneapolis police. May he rest in peace. George Floyd was killed due to the assumptions made based on the color of his skin. So we took to the streets, protesting against police brutality. We screamed, Black Lives Matter, but the government did not answer. We demanded change. We echoed Black Lives Matter through every street across America. As the citizens of the U.S. came together, our president refused to listen to us and change the broken system we live in. Enough was enough. July 2020. May the 4th be with you. Some celebrated the country with fireworks all month. Others refused to celebrate a country that did not value its people. We don't know what the future holds. We can only hope it gets better. But will it if we don't change?
Thank you to Skokie for sharing that video. And that was a project that was a collaboration, as I mentioned, with a teen volunteer group, their young adult librarian, and a staff photographer. So think about what are the kinds of voices and expressions that your patrons will find through media creation. It's exciting to think about, and the kinds of projects that we can nurture just by putting out a call for different stories and perspectives. As we do, let's think about media collaborators. We'll think about our media collaborators and the kind of partners that are out there in our community. There are some obvious partners. There are local newspapers, and there are potentially local radio and television. And I want to talk about, I listen to hear social media outlets. What I have in mind, particularly on that one, are local information sites. And these could potentially be any information sites, social media, websites, where community members are seeking out local information. It could be an actual citizen journalism site like East Lansing Information in East Lansing, Michigan, which I'll mention again later. It could be a social media site, presuming there might be some sort of moderator behind it. It might be some reps from things like Nextdoor sites, that local social networking services in neighborhoods. Here in the Estes Valley, an example might be the new Recursos Facebook page, which launched right after COVID, and it's now a very active Facebook page for Spanish language information. And it's been a great way to connect and share information for those seeking it in a bilingual or Spanish language way. And there is actually a moderator behind it who is a school administrator. So in that case, we would list that as one of our potential collaborators, somebody we would want to seek out for a conversation. You can think about your schools. Does your high school have a student newspaper or journalism class? For us, we were able to bring some library presentations to those classes on how to differentiate between real news and disreputable sources. You can think about your local businesses. We saw the example from Tacoma of a partnership from the local music store and what that led to. At the Estes Valley Library, we hosted several panel discussions with local and regional journalists and with regional communications professors to hear and talk about what goes into media creation from their perspectives. And they talked about the challenges that come up when readers may not discern the difference between an article by one of their staff members versus a press release or a letter to the editor. So it really opened up a real conversation about the news and how we process information and what are the ethics behind sharing things on social media. Is news something we should pay for? Those kinds of questions. And while we're thinking about different collaborators, there is a resource that might be in your community that we can't forget. And it's these guys. Do you have a community access TV or media outlet in your town or city? And if so, it's worth the while to seek them out. I couldn't resist this image of Wayne and Garth, since they're the most famous public access broadcasters, probably. But to be fair, you'll probably find them not in a basement, but in a real studio with equipment more like this. John Hargis at Tacoma Public Library came from the public media world before he joined Tacoma Public Library staff a decade ago. And he stressed to me that community access media people are very often interested in collaborations and have some of the same kind of public service values that we have in libraries. It varies from town to town, but if you haven't had a conversation with your Access Media, you might reach out. And worth noting too that the Alliance for Community Media, which is the professional organization for community access media professionals, is having an annual conference that's virtual this year in from June 29th to July 1st. So I don't think they have their list of topics, but we have the link and the resources. And in a year when you wouldn't have to pay travel costs, it might be worth looking a little bit later this season at their conference and seeing if it's something that you would want to check out. Well, we've talked about patrons and users and how they engage with media. And we've talked about, how we can nurture their needs for media creation. And what about libraries themselves as media creators? Let's check out a few examples, particularly with ways that libraries might be filling some of the voids in communities where what were once very fully staffed newsrooms are now newspapers that are often shells of their former selves. Quickly, a brief mention of this book. Margaret Sullivan is a longtime newspaper journalist, currently the media columnist for the Washington Post. And you don't have to read her recent book, Ghosting the News, to know that newspapers are struggling to survive, creating these so-called news deserts in many towns and communities. I wanted to pull out this quote, which I'll read to you because it really resonated, and maybe it does for you too. It says, "A newspaper's purpose isn't only to keep public officials accountable, it is also to be the village square for an entire metropolitan area, to help provide a common reality and touchstone, a sense of community and of place." What's interesting here, as I mentioned, is that these are some of the very values that we have for the roles that libraries are and can be in the communities we serve. And interesting to think about that shared commonality. I'll start off with a couple examples that Dr. Laura Saunders referenced in her webinar in our media literacy series on civics. This is the screenshot from the now COSTSA at the San Antonio Public Library. And it's an interesting example of where the library simply provides a studio space for public affairs programming, and that's the extent of the partnership. The library houses the project and everything else is run independently. In 2016, the only newspaper serving the town of Weare, New Hampshire, population just under 9,000, went out of business. And a local resident asked librarian Michael Sullivan, "What are you going to do about the paper?" The answer, a new publication called Where in the World. It's published under the umbrella of the library, staffed with community writers, and today it's still going strong with writers covering town board meetings and school news, like you can see in this sample of one of the latest issues. Library podcasting. Every month, the Enoch Pratt Free Library, that's the City Library of Baltimore, produces a high-quality podcast called Free to Bmore. The team at Baltimore had a vision to create what's become a major public affairs program with local leaders and innovators. They started off, well, seeking guests, and now it turns out guests and famous people in the city are seeking them out to be interviewed. It got voted the best conversation in Baltimore by Baltimore Magazine. The Free to Bmore podcasts cover politics, education, social justice, and they can pivot to current events like the pandemic. You can hear great conversations like the one with Freeman Hrabowski, who recounts being 12 years old when he marched with Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. The interviews are done by Megan McCorkle, a longtime journalist who is now the Enoch Pratt Library's Director of Communications. And what advice does Megan have for library podcasters? Well, she says, think big, beyond just the typical library topics. She says, research your interview subject well. No one likes to be an interview subject with someone who doesn't seem to know much about what they do. She says, stick with it, and don't be afraid to ask tough questions. Each episode also, and you can sample these, of course, from the Enoch Pratt Free Library site. You'll find they have a couple brief commercials about library services, creative way to work that in. And as I mentioned, there are 3 years worth of podcasts on the Enoch Pratt site that might just inspire your ideas, your next library podcast, or a podcast you're hoping to launch at your library. Briefly, I'll just mention very quickly some examples that are not from libraries, but which might spur some thinking about kinds of partnerships or collaborations we could do. Although there's no news gathering or news reporting models that are really anything like those robust days of fully staffed newsrooms, there are some hopeful signs. Report for America is a project that's sending young journalists to work for a period of time in local communities. And it's really like a Peace Corps for journalism. News outlets have to make the proposal, but in your conversations with a local media outlet, maybe you'll want to say, hey, would you want to work with the library and make a proposal to Report for America to see if we can bring a journalist to our community? There are things like ProPublica that's making similar efforts to bring journalists to underserved communities. And there are some really amazing examples like East Lansing Information of citizen journalism that's in an East Lansing, their site has uncovered a list of major stories, newsworthy stories that would have gone unreported without those teams of citizen journalists who said, you know, we believe this is important and we're working together on it. In Boston, ZoomX Radio is operated and programmed by young people in an underserved neighborhood. And while it grew out of a partnership with a community center, there's every reason to believe the next ZoomX Radio could emerge from the vision of a library media lab. These are just a few examples to inspire your ideas, and there are many more out there. So keep sending your ideas and examples in the chat room, and it's really exciting to think about. While we have, oh, and I'm going to kind of take that to the next step there too and say, kind of take us back to that idea I mentioned at the start, that for me, this was a learning journey. And I know that I have only scratched the surface with all of the great ideas out there. So I look forward to, I know some of you have typed some great things in the chat room. I'm going to be looking forward to reviewing those in the transcript, and we will, some of you may want to share some of your ideas and inspirations during our Q&A sessions as well as the Q&A. So with that, I want to turn things back over to Samantha so that we have some time to hear some of your questions and ideas.
Great, thanks, Kurtis. That was an excellent presentation. So we have about 15 minutes for questions, and I see a couple of people have been typing those in the Q&A box. So feel free to add your questions as we go along in that Q&A box or type them in the chat. So our first question is from Anna, and they are wondering how much this kind of program takes to start. And this is referring to the first few programs that you mentioned where they had like media labs.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can share that here at the Estes Valley Library, we have a makerspace, not specifically a media lab, but it has a component of that. And I would say that it depends on the scope to which you want to develop it. To actually have a real dedicated space may require, you know, you may need a good year of planning. You may need to think about things like, first off, where's the space going to be? Do we have the kind of technology infrastructure to support that? What kind of equipment do we need? Do we have a budget for it? Do we need to do fundraising? Do we want to make the media, do we want to make it a place that a donor might want to adopt? And then I think it will really be helpful, and I hope it's a starting place. You'll find in the worksheet that I sent out, it's a real starting place to list, again, thinking about what are your goals with the lab, and that will guide the kind of equipment and the kind of programs that you'll eventually develop out of it. Some of the libraries, yeah, might want to share that. Some of the libraries that have a media creation lab might want to share kind of some of the background on or the time frame that went into it. But I would allow at least a good planning year before you launch, depending on the scope. You know, there's some things you can do right away. You can start offering programs. You can turn your existing computer lab into a media lab after hours, those kinds of things. But to really do a big project may require some deep planning and thinking. It's a great question.
Great. I'm not seeing any other questions, so people might be thinking, but people are posting some of their examples in the chat around what they've been doing in their libraries or seeing.
Yeah, great examples.
Yeah. And there's Donna, who you mentioned, talking about Create Media Lab at Auburn Public Library.
Yeah, so mentioning, yeah, you can use your media lab for staff training as well as the public. So a whole variety of uses, you know, and you can have, if you want to use it as a classroom and training space, that might guide how you set up and design the room. Does your room need a screen with projection equipments? Are you going to use it just for people working in individual modes, or are you going to have it be a training lab? So that may also guide how you design your space.
Great. And I see quite a few questions are trickling in. So Barb is wondering if you have any recommendations for how to start a podcast on a shoestring budget for a book talk.
That's great. And I'll refer back to the example of Baltimore, because that was such a really, you know, and they had 3 years running to go with that, and you can check out that sample. That turned out to be a kind of a big vision, and Megan McCorkle at Baltimore said that they actually have a media or a marketing firm that they work with to do the editing. She does the interviews, but they outsource the editing. But that can be done in-house. It just is, you know, if it doesn't require a tremendous amount of equipment. And there are some books out there too on podcasting and some great resources. So on a shoestring, I think it can be done with and you might think about things like what we did here in Estes Valley was have a local musician who created an original bumper for us. So now for all of our programs, we have the same music that we use, and with the permission and its original theme. So that's something that we created once and we're able to use again and again. So all of that really can be done in-house. It will require probably more of your staff time than necessarily an expensive amount of equipment with today's things. And again, if you're thinking about, a lot of libraries are doing some author talks and book reviews, and I would say, yeah, go online and sample some of those too, like I did, because that'll give you some ideas. And some of you, if you are library podcasters, feel free to mention that in the chat room if you're doing something, and we can check that out and sample what you're doing, and maybe reach out to you on how you were able to put that together.
Great. And then Marie is wondering, how do you approach your administration to get behind an idea for starting a library podcast?
Great idea. Again, I would say a starting place may not be, the right starting place may not be to say, we want to do a library podcast. What's it going to take to do it? The starting place really might be to work through that worksheet and say, what are some of our library goals? Are there patrons that we are not currently serving who might be served by that? What would be the goals both of doing the podcast? Who do we want to reach? Who will be our audience? Will we use it as a way to help? If we create a great podcast, can we help others in our community do it? Will we be? So I think it will really start with looking at those goals and then determining, do they match with the library's strategic goals? And if they do, well, then maybe you're off and running on a path to your library podcast. And if they don't, well, there's probably, then it either means maybe you haven't identified the right goals for your podcast, or, you know, maybe you are, maybe your administration is saying, well, we're serving in other ways. But I kind of am of a mind that, gosh, with that being such a creative tool, that there's probably a library podcast in most of your creative idea thinking that could lead to some really great things with the library. But the starting place really is making sure your goals align with your library's strategic goals.
Great. And then the next question is from Kim. They are wondering if you could talk a little bit about staff training them how to use the Media Lab in order for them to assist patrons.
Mm-hmm. And there really are a variety of ways you can do that. And it's sometimes, you know, I look at our library model, we're a small library, and everybody has a little proficiency at something, but not any one of us are experts at all the equipment. So we may identify a core group of people who are particularly trained on a piece of equipment. Then for your patrons, if you're in turn thinking about how do you in turn train your patrons to use that, as I mentioned, you know, you can use some combination of programs, you can use some combination of office hours, a badging system, perhaps one-on-one opportunities for people who might be already come with some skill set. But I think your question was especially for staff. And it comes down to, again, who in the library needs to be an expert on this particular piece of equipment. And we found in the last year that a lot of you, people who work in programs have had to gain some expertise at using that equipment to create all that virtual program opportunity. So maybe you have one skilled person, an IT person, and they train your programming staff to do the basics that they need to do on that. So I would look at it as almost kind of a, you know, maybe there's a flow chart involved in terms of what training levels each staff member will need to match what kinds of things they're doing. And again, there are some great free resources out there. We mentioned, you know, obviously YouTube, but there's things like LinkedIn Learning. So if you don't have access to that, you might check into that as one of those online sources.
Great. The next question is from Dan. They are wondering if you have any advice for creating media spaces in small libraries that might not have much space available.
Yeah, and again, our example, you know, Donna from Auburn, Maine can speak to that too. That's a small space. And I think they have just as few as maybe it's 3 Macintosh computers in that lab. So now, so you can definitely do something with a small space. You might have to think about a scheduling system. You might have to, you know, some sort of reservation system for patrons who use it. And, you know, in terms of if you're seeing that the space is not serving the demand, you can, that's one way that you can manage that. But it's definitely, I think Auburn, Maine's example is a nice example of what a smaller size library can do with that space. And you saw in the Tacoma Public Library example, that's a larger space, but it was originally just 2 vacated staff office rooms. So not a huge, and then we saw in Dallas, you know, where they have a whole, now these 3 adjoining labs. So you can definitely scale your lab to the space you have to work with. And then subsequent to that, plan your reservation system, you know, what you get your patrons accustomed to based on that availability.
Great. The next question is from Suzanne. They are wondering if you could discuss any information on how to combat disinformation being made in the library.
Yes, and you may be, and maybe your question is kind of thinking about patrons who might come in to do media engagement or creation and who are using it for, you know, consciously or unconsciously for reasons that might not be appropriate. Certainly for those patrons who you can engage with and who maybe are doing it, you know, maybe they're sharing misinformation, not realizing the consequences of what they're doing. I would point, you know, back to the other, oh gosh, the 5 great webinars previous to mine today that have some great ideas for programs and outreach and ways, even just at the reference desk, that you can have a conversation with someone. If we're thinking about someone who is doing something that's intentionally malicious, or someone who, you know, maybe has more ulterior motives. I know Dr. Cook made that distinction between, you know, misinformation and disinformation, and there's a whole section in that in the practitioner's guide on that. then if that becomes an issue and a concern, you may have to see to what extent your policies are or not able to address that. Obviously, we can't control everything that people do on public machines, but if you see an issue and a way to intercept that, then you might see if there's a way within your policies that, you know, whether it be a user agreement that someone signs, whether it be hopefully with sometimes with a casual conversation, so it's a difficult issue, and the question opens up a lot of other levels of, yeah, why is someone sharing information that might not be accurate? And hopefully the majority of folks are doing it, not realizing what they do. And that's where it's great that we have the opportunity in libraries to be a positive influence on media creators out there. Again, that doesn't happen for folks who have all this equipment at home, but people come in the library, there's so much greater potential to kind of bring people into that village square where they are part of a community and see themselves as a community of collaborators with the responsibilities that come with that.
So I think we have time for one more question. So this is from KF. Can you briefly discuss the benefits of running a book club podcast versus a book club on Teams or Zoom?
Sure. A book club podcast versus Teams or Zoom. Of course, a podcast is generally going to be a recorded kind of content where you may invite interaction in other ways when you post that on your social media page. So unless you're doing it as kind of a live feed, for instance, the podcasts at Baltimore are recorded programs. And so you have the benefit of being able to do kind of a real polished kind of thing and keep it to your time. If you're using Zoom for a book discussion, that, of course, is a great way to invite conversation in a chat room or in actual those video tiles. So I think that's one way to look at it. There are probably I'm sure there are half a dozen other ways you might make that distinction. But to me, the first thing that comes to mind is what level of interactivity do you want with those who are experiencing your book discussion or book review.
Great. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and close this out since we're almost at time. So I just want to say a huge thank you to you, Kurtis, for this presentation, and also to my colleagues behind the scenes, Sarah Osman, Mary Davis Fournier, and Hannah Arata for their support on this webinar. If you have any questions that we were unable to get to in this session, please email publicprograms@ala.org. We're more than happy to help you out. This presentation has been offered as part of the Media Literacy Education in Libraries for Adult Audiences project with support from a grant from the Institute of Museum and Library Services. The archived version of the session will be available to view on programminglibrarian.org within 48 hours. Thank you to everyone for joining us today. Thanks.